All right, everyone, let's do this. How are you? Everyone doing good? I bet you're doing okay. Welcome to this week's episode of our podcast. It's called Is Breakfast Included? On the show this week, I sit down with a good friend of mine, Russ Rojas. Now, Russ has a podcast called the 415 Podcast. You can find it on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, all the usual suspects. We started the initial interview was just because we wanted to do it about his podcast. But man, Russ has this history. He's a former roadie. He used to work for a band called, you might have heard of him, Pantera. He went on to work for Lord Tracy. He's also a photographer. He's had an internet radio show. Man, he's done a little bit of everything. And we got into art history as buddies. Anyway, it was a lot of fun catching up with Russ. I'll let you check it out.
Yeah, ready whenever you are.
All right, man. Tell everyone who you are.
My name is Russ Rojas from Arlington, Texas. Friends of Bernie's for a long time. Been kind of hooked up. Kind of a funny way we hooked up.
Didn't hook up that way, but we hooked up.
Well, yeah, we didn't hook up that way. Y'all dirty-minded people. I was managing a band. I don't even remember which band I was managing, and I was trying to get a show. And you were at I
was working at Club Indigo.
And I guess it was early morning. I kept calling. Funny answer phone. What? You know, he was asleep. You were asleep. So I started talking, and we started talking about the band and stuff. And we just became buddies, man. We became friends, talking all the time. I know there was a long time where I didn't even know who you were. And, you know, probably past the street. I talked to you 1,000 times. And then finally we met, and we've been friends ever since. Probably a good 20 years, if not more.
Yeah, I remember when they made me in charge of booking that place, they put my personal number as rather than, the office number, like calling.
Right.
And yeah, you called. It was like, I want to say it was like 8 a.m. on a weekday.
Yeah.
And I answered the phone, and I'm like, dude, hello. And then you're like, hey man, can I talk to Bernie? And I remember just I could have been like, yeah, just call me later at this number. But I think you and I ended up talking like a couple of hours.
Yeah, we did.
Because we knew all the same people. And then I was like, yeah, man, I'll book your band.
And then I actually worked with one of your old bands,
Yeah.
As that a little bit. It was kind of fun, back in the day. So
yeah. But I think what we connected with is we started talking, and you told me you worked with I don't know, a couple of bands from Texas that actually made a name for themselves for a while.
Yeah, Pantera for one.
Pantera, and then you moved on from Pantera to a band called Lord Tracy.
Absolutely. Terry Glaze, the original singer for Pantera, is my best friend.
Terry Glaze, who's a friend of this show. He's done the podcast twice. Yeah. He's the only person who's done it twice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually went to junior high with Rex, and Rex, I was in the band, and I played saxophone, and Rex was actually a tuba player, and I got pictures to prove that. And he also played bass for the choir. And I knew him in school. I didn't know him that well, but I knew him in junior high. And then we went off to high school. He went to Sam Houston High School here in Arlington, and I went to Bowie High School in Arlington. And one night, a bunch of guys were talking about, hey, let's go out to this place in West Fort Worth. And I lived in Arlington at the time, and it was probably a good 30, 45-minute drive to the west side of Fort Worth, just to the boonies. And a club called I can't remember the name, Joe's Garage. And when I got in there and they were playing, I said, hey, I know that dude. It was Rex.
Yeah.
And so I played 3 sets every night. And so after the first set, I went up and started talking to him. We tried to bullshit, and he introduced me to everybody in the band, Vinny and Daryl and Terry. And at the end of the night, Terry came up to me. I was actually backstage, which was actually a freezer. It was an old freezer backstage. It was so funny. And so we're back there talking. He said, hey, man, you coming out to the show tomorrow? I said, yeah, I think I may come back out. And he asked me where I lived. Well, it turns out that Terry lived literally like 5 blocks from my house. And so the next night, he calls me. It's way before cell phones. He calls me at home, and I go pick him up. And pretty much we were inseparable at that time. I mean, I started kind of hanging out, and then before I knew it, I was pulling cables and plugging up amps, and never did the guitar work part, changing strings or anything like that or tuning. But I was always, big boy. I was picked up, cases and set the stage up and help with the drums and stuff. And then Terry, in '85, Terry decided to leave, quit, fired, whatever everybody wants to say, and he formed Lord Tracy.
Now, was this during their cover band years?
Yeah, Pantera would do like 3 sets every night. They played. They would play, and it was funny because they would play Thursday night, which was usually college night, most places, and they still do that. But they would play 3 sets. They would play Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and sometimes Sunday night. So they played 4 days in a row at the same venue. That is unheard of now. I mean, God forbid bands don't do that stuff now. But they would play 4 nights, and it was 3 sets a night. And usually the first set was just nothing but covers, Judas Priest and some Metallica. Metallica was still really new, and they were kind of underground at the time. And, Keel and all those other bands like that, but Pantera was making their own work, their own path, which was really cool. And then their second set was pretty much originals. And then the third set was pretty much, I guess, kind of a combination of originals and the covers. And actually, Daryl used to sing, what's that Metallica song?
Whiplash.
I think it was Whiplash. And it was just fun. And everybody used to show up, and it didn't matter. Thursday night, Friday night, whatever, it was always freaking packed. And Pantera was, at the time, the only other bands they had around were just, they were still a local band, of course, but they were one of the only bands in this area that I knew that was just packing in places. And you had other bands high school bands and stuff that were around, but they weren't doing, I'm not gonna say they weren't doing good. They just weren't as big as Pantera was. It was really crazy as I look back now going, damn, we were in high school and these guys were already packing in small venues.
I remember me being in high school and going to these small venues to see this local band that was to us, they were rock stars.
Right, exactly. It's weird.
Already,
they had a huge following, and they had their own little circuit where they play Fort Worth, and then go down out to Abilene, and then go out to El Paso, and then they come back this way. They play in Odessa, Midland area, and then they go down to San Antonio or Austin and play, and then they'd shoot back up to Shreveport and, Texarkana and Tyler, and then they come back around to Oklahoma City, and then they'd start their tour again. They'd come back down, and that was like every month. That was the thing. They played the same clubs, just this big giant circle, in these 3 states. Yeah. And it was ungodly. And then during the summertime, I'd go out and I'd work with them. It was funny because here we are, a bunch of kids either still in high school or just barely out of high school. I mean, literally barely, like a year out. And we're packing in places. I mean, we played with Dawkins in Sherman, and I think we had more fans than Dawkins did. It was really weird,
Well, Russ, to be honest, as Joey C. Jones once said, everybody blows Dawkins away.
Hey, not to dog anybody, but Don was not so nice.
No. I've met him a couple of times. He was a nice guy. But I went to see one of Joey's last shows, and he said that from the stage. Everybody blows Dawkins away.
Yeah, but this last time that Lord Tracy played Dawkins, it's funny when they played with Don Dawkins, not Dawkins, but Don Dawkins. He was just such a nice guy, and I was like, and I told him, I said, man, the first time I met you back in the '80s, you were a dick, and he just laughed. He goes, yeah, I hear that a lot, but it was cool. It was cool meeting some of the people, and but the old days is crazy because Daryl. When I first saw Daryl, actually, they played at my high school talent show, and I thought Daryl was a girl. And I was like, damn, that's the ugliest girl I've ever seen. He had these tight spandex. He was skinny as a rail, and then had this big giant fro.
Yeah, and I've seen the pictures.
Do what?
I've seen the pictures of the fro.
Oh no, crazy! And he's just little bitty dude, and I always thought they were cool. And then I found out that Terry and Vinny both went to high school at the same time I did at the same high school. And then so when I left and went to Arlington High School, they had already graduated, and I still continue to work for them. We still doing stuff. And then turned out that me and Daryl had a record keeping class together, Miss Leo's class, and it was so funny because Daryl, it was a record keeping class, and Miss Leo was just this typical. She looked like your typical grandma. She had that little like that moo on it. She
Yeah,
would,
yeah.
gray hair, pulled back in a little bun, glasses, and she was just the sweetest thing in the world. And Daryl used to give her so much crap, but it was like, it wasn't me in meanness. It was just in playfulness. And she'd always say, Daryl, you better learn how to ride a check. And he'd go, I want to be a rock star. I'm gonna have people people writing my checks for me. I'm not gonna have to. I'm just gonna count my money. And we just started laughing. But who would have known? Years later that he would be the biggest rock star in the world.
I know, right? Right.
It's just easy because here's this kid that me and him would go out to lunch in his yellow Camaro, his yellow Firebird, and get blasted, stoned out of our minds, and then go back to Miss Leo's class and just laugh our ass off. And he actually got me in trouble one time. He threw an eraser. He sat in front of me. He threw an eraser and hit Miss Leo in the back of the head when they actually had chalkboards. And it was funny because you could see the chalk dust bounce off her head and kind of come out a little bit. And it was like, oh my God. He jumps up and looks at me and goes, dude, that was uncool. You shouldn't have thrown that at her. Of course, I got sent to the office and I'm looking at him at the door and I'm going, you asshole. But he dared me one time to pierce my ear in her class, and I did. And the girl next to me passed out. But he was just. I always remember Daryl as from the first day I met him to the last day I saw him. He was the same kid. He was a big kid. He loved to have fun, and he was just always very cheerful. I don't think I've ever seen him upset or mean or mad at anybody. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't, but.
Yeah,
I never saw it. But the last time I saw him was actually a few months before he got killed at Curtain Club when Lord Tracy played. And he came up and yelled out Jelly Bean across and it was weird because I heard it and I knew he was the only one that called me that. And he came up and he jumped up on top of me, wrapped his legs around my big fat body and was like, dude, Jelly Bean, he rubbed my head, and then, like I said, 3, 4, 5 months later, he was killed, and it sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a guy, and I was actually watching something on YouTube the other day, and it was about Pantera, and he's got him on camera, and to hear his voice again was just like so cool. It was like, wow, I remember that freaking gravelly voice, But Daryl was cool, man. I didn't, when I went on tour, I didn't see him as much because we were actually on a different circuit that they were. I mean, we would play a town, and they would be coming like 2 days later, or they were already there and then we'd come by behind them. We were out kind of like tour, but it was kind of fun. But, I miss that guy. He was so cool because I would run into him anywhere in Arlington. I mean, you could run into him at the freaking gas station and grocery store, porn shop, whatever.
Yeah. It's funny whenever I talk to somebody from that was really in that scene back in that time, and I bring up Pantera or they're brought up, the conversation becomes about Daryl. And, like I said, I'm not ever going to say I was one of his friends. I was in his presence several times, but I was just talking to Sterling a few months ago. And like I told Sterling, well, Daryl always made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Mm-hmm. If he just met you or if he knew you forever, once he was talking to you, he'd zero in and start and finish the conversation. There was no like looking over your shoulder to see if there was anybody more important he should talk to. And like I said, I'll never sit here and say like, oh, we were buddies, but I was in his presence and we used to talk and we used to chat. And I remember, a couple of nights where it was just pretty deep,
Yeah.
But like I said, anytime he gets brought up, this show becomes a Dimebag Daryl show.
I know.
Or let's say a Diamond Daryl show.
Yeah, I know. That's funny. And I get that a lot. People, oh, you work for Pantera? I said, yeah. And like you said, the first thing is, well, were you friends with Daryl? As a matter of fact, I was, man. When we were in high school, he'd spend the night at my house and, whatever. And it's just, you're right. It always turns into Daryl. And it's a big, what about Vinny? And I was like, Vinny's Vinny. Vinny to me was Vinny. at the time, and if he was still alive, he'd still be the Lars of Pantera. He was he was the business dude.
All
I mean, he
business,
was
yeah.
all business, always, you know, had that straight face, you know. And when he let loose, he let loose. But it was always funny. He was always it was about business.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, man. There's got to be one
No,
in the band. So
yeah, absolutely.
around they were going had they already started writing for power metal when Terry decided to leave? Like
Terry, I believe. Don't get me wrong. I think Terry had actually had already written power metal,
uh-huh.
and I think, and I want to say that Terry actually laid down the first tracks of that album, and um, then Phil had to come in and redo them.
Uh-huh.
And there are some there on the power metal, and I can't remember which song it is, but there's a song that makes reference to Terry, and it's just kind of funny. He's kind of like at that time it was kind of like a jab at Terry.
Yeah.
But it's because people have always asked me before, does Terry hate Pantera? No, and I can guarantee, I know for a fact that Terry doesn't hate Pantera. He's very happy for them. He was very happy for them because you got two bands out of it, you know, and you know the music business as well as I do. It's hard, and back in the '80s, man, you know, we supported everybody, as you know, as it should be, and but Terry never hated Pantera. It was what it is what it is. I mean, Terry wanted to go the direction that he actually went with Lord Tracy, and Pantera went the way they wanted to go to, and so it worked out for the best. I mean, you know, Terry's into, you know, like Cheap Trick and the Police and Lenny Kravitz and stuff like that, whereas Pantera's into Metallica and, you know, Anthrax and stuff like that. So it worked out, but um, I almost want to bet for sure that the album had already been written, and I actually got a demo tape of the power metal album.
Yeah.
It's on freaking cassette, you know. And I've had people offer me a couple $100 for it. I'm not gonna sell it. I mean, it's just, you know, not just to some random person, you know, but I've given, you know, I had a couple of those Diamond Daryl guitar picks, and I think I got one left. But, you know, I've given them to a couple of my friends that are huge guitar players, you know, guitar fans, and I've given a couple away here and there, you know. But other than that, I'm not going to get, you know, I'd have to, you know, I'm gonna have to will my last one probably to you, you know.
You guys heard it.
Yeah, you heard it. I will will my last Diamond Daryl pink pick to Bernie. I'll make sure I tell my wife to give you the pick.
Right on, man.
So
So you moved on. You left with Terry. Terry started Lord Tracy. You know, we had Terry. Terry was one of the first guests on here. Well, of course, you set it all up for me, and told me all about that. What was it like going out with those guys, man, in the '80s? Because that was around 88, 89? Or 91. I'm sorry.
no, because the Death Gods Babylon album came out in '89, so they got together pretty shortly after Terry left Pantera, so about 86, 87. And it was funny because Terry will tell the story too, and I'll tell it the kind of the way he does it. Pantera had played at the Bronco Bowl when Terry was with them, and Lightning had opened up for Pantera. And of course, if most people in Dallas know, Lightning had Chris Craig on drums, Rocky Atlas, and Barney on bass. And Barney was phenomenal then. You know, he was a young kid, and Terry had always wanted to play with Barney. And so when he had the opportunity, when he left Pantera, he'll tell you that in the story is that he went initially to steal Barney from what was at that time called 3D. It was Chris Craig on drums, Jimmy R on guitar, and Barney on bass. He actually went in there to try to steal Barney away from him and form another band. But me and him went to the rehearsal. They asked me if he wanted to come out and just bullshit and sing. And so anyway, we went out there, North Arlington, went out to this little recording studio or rehearsal hall, and they got in there. It was like they'd been playing for forever. I mean, they just started playing, and it's like, wow. And I think that's when Terry realized that this band was it. This is the band that he wanted to play in. And he got the best of both worlds. He got to be in a band, and he got to play with Barney. And not only that, Chris was a phenomenal drummer, and Jimmy was just that bluesy rock and roll guitar player. and it just freaking worked. And he went out to Memphis like the next weekend and never looked back. And it was so much fun because those guys bring so much talent to the table. And you got Terry on vocals, who can also play guitar, and then you got Barney playing phenomenal bass. And then they just started writing. And I think Terry has always written stuff, so I think some of the stuff he brought to the table was stuff that he had already written, and they just polished it off, and it was just crazy because it seemed like, I look back now and I go, wow, it seemed like it just happened overnight, which it kind of did, but it really didn't. I mean, they were playing clubs. We play at the On the Rocks to 3 people, and those were the wives.
Yeah.
It would be dead. But those guys would play like they were playing to 10,000 people, a stadium, and one night this lady came in. She was with Geffen Records. She was actually here to see, I remember it was a Thursday night. She actually was here to see Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians because they were on Geffen's label.
Yeah.
And she just happened to be walking around Deep Ellum, got into the bar, and I was standing there, and she came up to me. She goes, "Hey, my name is such and such." She gave me her card, and I looked down. I said, "Geffen Records." I was like, she was any chance of talking to the guys in the band. I'm like, okay, this can't be real. There's only like 3 people in the freaking club. And so I go back to the guys and, "Hey man, this chick is here, wants to talk to you." And they're like, "Whatever." So she comes back, and next thing we know is like David Geffen starts getting interested. And then something happened at the basement where a band had canceled, and they were doing Z-Rock Metal Mondays. And they asked Lord Tracy to play. Actually, at the time, they were still called 3D. And they asked them to play, and it was packed. Well, it's only packed because everybody wanted to be on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And before we knew it, it was just like people were coming out to see the band, and it just kind of a weird thing is just all of a sudden we were getting courted by all these record companies. We had no manager, we had no plan. It was just something that just happened, and it took probably a good year, but it was just weird because here they were playing to nobody, to playing to packed houses.
Yeah.
They like within a month, and I can only say that Z-Rock helped us. It was live coast to coast, I remember that, and then Danny Brown was friends with Barney and Chris, and he had a studio out in Mesquite or somewhere out there. And I remember when they decided to change the name from 3D, and we were actually in the studio, me, Rusty, and in the band, and everybody. Rusty was watching a freaking porno, and it was Tracy Lords, and they were doing a demo for the record company, and Danny goes, "What are we naming this band?" They didn't like the name 3D; it just sounded too corny.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rusty yells out, "Tracy Lords!" So Danny, I thought he was joking, writes Tracy Lords on the reel, on the canister. And we started looking at it, and that's how it stuck. And then, yes, of course, we did get a cease and desist from Tracy Lords herself, her legal department. And the band actually, by that time, the band had already was getting ready to have a record deal with MCA, but we still had no manager. So the band negotiated everything at first. So I think, like Terry said before, I think they did that backwards. Got a manager instead of having a manager and then getting a record deal. But it worked out. It was so much fun, dude. I mean, it was my first big tour. I mean, it was crazy. A few months later, we found out we're going out with Ace Frehley, and of course, who isn't an Ace Frehley fan? I mean, it was just cool. But
I know, even if you're not an Ace Frehley fan, you're a fucking Ace Frehley fan.
Oh yeah, dude. It was so cool. It was like, because I remember when I'm dating myself, but when I was, God, maybe 2nd or 3rd grade, I bought my first Kiss album. That was like 73.
It's the gateway band, man.
It was cool. And I remember my dad, I'm looking at him, it was a vinyl, and I was like, "Dad, I want to buy this album." "Ah, you're not gonna buy that crap. Look at those guys. They got freaking makeup on, or those guys or those girls, And I was like, "I want that album." He finally bought it for me. But it was just so cool who would have known that many, many years later that I'd actually be on tour with Ace, and it's just the funnest. And I know we drove out to, where we go? North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina was our first night. and we had a meeting with their management, and we were told at that time we couldn't talk about we couldn't talk about the movie Phantom Kiss Meets Phantom in the Park.
Uh-huh.
We couldn't talk about the movie. We couldn't talk about drugs or alcohol because Ace was clean,
Uh-huh.
and which was a lie. And they just set out rules. We can't, no alcohol on the stage. When all alcohol had to be taken off the stage before Ace got on the stage. No, if you smoke weed, you can't do it backstage. It was just so many different rules. And the first couple nights were kind of hard because they were kind of standoffish. But once you break bread, it's done. And you know that. I mean, you worked a lot of road crews. You're on a road crew, and especially when Rusty's around, he's firing up a big fatty, and all of a sudden you get Ace Frehley's crew going, "Hey man, can I have some of that?" And before you know it, you're just best buds. And it got to the point where we were helping. They would help us load in and load out, and we would help them load in and load out. And me and Rusty would help provide security for Ace and Richie Scarlett and all the guys in the band, and and it was just so cool. It was so cool to be out with them, and people that were big rock stars were coming out to the shows, and it was so much fun.
Yeah. Let me interrupt you for a second, man. You said something earlier, like you bought that Kiss album, and then all these years later, you were on tour with Ace. In this industry, it's kind of not cool to be a fan. I mean, you meet a lot of people who are like,
right.
Whatever, this, whatever. But like for me, like I've worked for a lot of bands that, for most of the bands that I've worked for, I wasn't a fan to begin with.
Right.
I later became a fan because of the music, including the current band I'm with.
Right.
But that one time you get to work for a band that their posters were on your wall, and that happened for me, and I had to keep a very professional composure, but to be able to tell that person, like, dude, like this is so crazy to me that I'm standing in front of you. I'm actually working with you, working for you, and they appreciate that.
It's cool because you want to, as a fan of Aces, you want to go, oh my god, you want to do that little girl thing, oh my god, it's fucking Ace Frehley. But again, like you said, you have to be professional.
Yeah,
and and I've at that time, I've dealt with a lot of kind of famous people, and to me, they're just people. And I've learned through the years, they're just people, just like you and me.
Yeah.
They put their pants on the same way, they shit the same way, whatever. But Ace was so cool, and it got to, like I said, after the first week, it got to the point where we were like hanging out with their crew, we were hanging out with their band members. Me and Richie Scarlett still talk. He's a friend of mine on Facebook, and we still talk. Matter of fact, he was here a couple of years ago with Ace, and I got them to go to. I got a friend of mine worked at AT&T, and I got his wife, who's since passed, was a huge Cowboy fan, and so I got them to go do the tour for nothing. It was just something we do favors for each other, But I still talk to Richie. And it is just so cool, because he always tells me, when I come to town, dude, we're gonna go get some lunch. I'm like, bring it, dude. But the Ace thing was so cool because it got to the point where you would sit down and eat breakfast with Ace, and it was just like, that's fucking Ace Frehley. I'm eating fucking Cheerios and freaking omelets with fucking Ace Frehley. And look at, wow, that's freaking badass. But you got to be professional. But like I said, hanging out with those guys. I remember being on the bus in Houston with Ace. I was actually looking for a promo picture, and he comes up and puts his arm around me and goes, "You gonna take a picture?" And Richie Scarlett goes, "Ace, he wants a promo." Oh, and then he sits down and like, dude, Ace giving me a hug, But and on that same tour, I got to meet what's the name? The guy from White Lion, the guitar player from White Lion,
Vito Bratta.
Vito, yeah. And then I met
Vito has become a recluse, man.
I heard that too.
Yeah.
I was standing watching the Ace show at the Palladium in LA after we had opened up for him, and I was standing on the ramp, and I look over next to me, and rubbing shoulders with me was Peter Criss. And I'm like, holy shit, you're Peter Criss, and we played with this, and on the same tour, we were off, and we actually played a show with Bad English at the same time, and I got to meet Sam Kinison that night, and who would have known that a year later he'd be dead? But
Yeah.
it was cool, just you can't get starstruck in this business, and it's sometimes it can be easy to, but
Oh, I
you
still
do,
get starstruck until then I lose it real quick.
yeah,
Yeah, I get constantly made fun of because I get starstruck, but I don't show it.
right, right, I took my wife a few years ago to go see Brett Michaels in Tyler, and as you know, I shoot some photography, so I don't know, I can't remember how it happened, but someone called me and said, "Hey, man, I got you in to see Brett Michaels." I said, "Badass, where?" Tyler, and I was like, "What?" That's like 2 hours from where I'm at.
Was it at Clicks?
It was at the oil rig,
The Oil Palace.
Oil Palace, and I drove all the way out there, and it was cool because when we got there, we also I got to introduce myself to the guys from Warrant.
Uh-huh.
They were opening band, and then Lita Ford was the main support, and it was so cool because Lita was just, and that's another person. She was such a sweetheart. She was so nice. Me and my wife were sitting at this little table backstage, and she came down. She goes, "Can I sit with y'all?" I was like, "Yeah, of course. You're Lita Ford, And but Brett Michaels was cool. I mean, he was doing his meet and greet thing, but he was really cool. We talked for a little bit, but yeah, it's easy to get starstruck out here, on the road. And matter of fact, I'm a huge fan of the band you're with, and I saw them twice at Reunion Arena. Took my sister both times.
Uh-huh.
So, but yeah, when I found out you were working with them, I was like, oh hell yeah, that's cool right there. I'm still a fan. I've always been a fan of theirs, regardless. People go, "Oh, that's some chick rock." Okay, and
All right. Well, man, you mentioned this earlier. You do a little photography. How did you get into photography? I mean, because
well,
you left Lord Tracy, you kind of laid low, and you started managing bands. And then, did you get into photography while you were on the road? Or
yes, and I'd always been interested in photography since I was younger. I had always loved to take pictures, and in high school, we didn't have that many photography classes, and I never could get into a photography class, but I still took pictures with an old film camera. My dad had bought an AE1 that he never used, a Minolta AE1, and I picked it up, started shooting, but I wanted to be on the yearbook, or the newspaper, whatever, at the school, and I never could get in. And it's funny, but I would take pictures on the road. I got tons of pictures that I still haven't gone through, but one night, a friend of mine worked for a magazine called Rock and Roll Industries Magazine out of LA, and I had hooked him up with the interview. Terry did an interview for him for the magazine, and I hooked him up with some interviews with some other people and stuff. And anyway, they were coming here to do the Ride for Dime. The editor and his wife, who owned the company. Well, on the way here, she was going to be the photographer, and on the way here, she broke her camera. So he reaches out to me and says, "Hey, you're still in Dallas. I'm gonna be there in a couple of days with the Ride for Dime. Can you shoot pictures?" And I said, "Okay." He goes, "We're gonna give you all clearance. If we can say yes, we'll give you all clearance." Well, anyway, I shot that whole weekend. From Thursday to freaking Sunday, and sent her probably a good 200-300 pictures. And she calls me back a few months later, just out of the blue, and says, "Hey, you want to do some freelance for us?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "We don't have anybody in Texas. Would you be willing to go to these shows?" And I was like, "Yeah, if I'm going for free, hell yeah." And so I've shot the Texas Mutiny, which had Hell Yeah and Ghost, and there was a ton of bands. There was 3 stages, and they were all running pretty much simultaneously, except for the main stage. But it was so cool. And then after that, I did Kaboo, Texas, that had Lionel Richie and Rick Springfield, Collective Soul, Los Lobos, Los Lonely Boys, B-52s, The Killers. It was so much fun. So I've done quite a few. And then in the meantime, I'd also been shooting. I'd shot at Gas Monkey Live, Gas Monkey Bar and Grill. So just recently I just shot Santana and Kenny Loggins, and that was pretty cool. But yeah, it kind of fell in my lap, and it was actually that I'd actually been wanting to do for, Joe Jerome, who used to shoot pictures for Pantera quite a bit, and he was a concert photographer. He worked for the magazine. He worked for like Fort Worth Star Telegram out here, and he was always hanging out with Pantera. I always thought that was cool, photographer, not photographer. And I always wanted to get into it, never could figure out how. And then I'm doing it, and it's like, wow. And I get people all the time who go, man, I saw you at Kenny Loggins a couple months ago, and I saw you at such and such a year or so ago. You're still shooting. And it's funny because you see people that you see a lot of people at these concerts, and they know you. You know, so it's kind of cool. But it was something I just love shooting photography, whether it's concerts or babies or families or whatever. I just, you can't ever go wrong. And people go, oh, I take bad pictures. No one really takes a bad picture, and it's whatever your eye sees, man. And that's what I say,
Well, Russ, I have to tell you, I do take bad pictures.
No, you don't.
I don't have a good side.
But yeah, it's fun. I just I wish I could do it more often. I wish I could do it for a living.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so cool because I've got to meet so many different artists from different genres. Anywhere from hip hop to country to thrash to yacht rock to and it's just so much fun because I think like 99% of the artists I've ever dealt with at a show are cool. They've always been really cool with us.
Uh-huh.
And so I give it to a lot of artists. I mean, I don't think I've really met anybody that was an asshole or anything. I did send all my pictures to Lionel Richie's management company. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I took these pictures. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking for money. All I'm asking is to get my name out there. And I sent her the pictures, and they've actually used them on some of his websites. So it was actually kind of cool. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. Like I said, I wish I could do it more often. So, but yeah, I love it, dude. I mean, like I said, I shoot crazy stuff. I see stuff. It's weird because I see stuff. I guess I'm kind of like an artist. Like, when people write, I just see stuff in my head, and I'm like, oh, that'd be cool for a picture. If you did it this way or did it that way, you added this on it. But I just see things in my head that I think are cool, that I think are cool. So, but.
Well, Russ, excuse me, you and I, man, we've been friends, I'm going to say well over 20 years.
Yeah.
It's probably longer than 20 years because I don't know the exact year we met. We've known each other. So I feel like I've known you all my life.
I know.
But I know when I was starting this podcast, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how I wanted to do it. All I knew is I needed some help. And I went to you and I go, hey, will you sit down with me and just do an interview and we'll do this? And you said, yeah, I'll do it. We went and sat in your garage and we talked for about an hour. And it was basically research for me to see how I wanted to approach this. But why I reached out to you is you started your own podcast.
Exactly. And I'm going to tell you honestly, I had thought about it, but I didn't know how to start it. And then when you came over and we started talking, I'm like, wow, this is cool. So you gave me the fire to start my podcast. And I'm kind of still at that point where I love your context because it's so cool because you talk about everybody,
uh-huh.
And I used to do an internet radio show live every Wednesday night.
I remember that
2-hour show every night from 8 to 10. And my show was, someone coming from a local band trying to make it, I thought, you know what? I'm going to take care of the local guys. Whatever, and it didn't matter. At first, I started local Dallas-Fort Worth area, North Texas, and then Chris didn't want me to do anything out of North Texas, and I was like, no, dude. There's other internet stations that are doing the same thing I'm doing. I need to broaden my horizons. So I started doing local unsigned bands from coast to coast, and I just reached out to friends like you. You're in the other side of the states, and so I would reach out to someone like you. Hey, Bernie, do you know any bands in your area that want to get some internet radio play? And so I would reach out like Greg King. He's up in Denver.
Uh-huh.
I reached out to him and he sent me a couple bands, and then Patrick is up in Humboldt County, California. He was sending me bands because he was going to and from Vegas, so he started sending me bands. And then out of the blue, this guy calls me. Actually, my first interview, and I'll never forget it. My first radio interview, I drove to downtown Dallas to the Sheraton and did an interview with a guy that was with a band called Psych, and they were from Easton, Pennsylvania. And he was here in Dallas because he used to work for Shark Tank.
Uh-huh.
And so I went over there and I took this little 4-track recorder, 4-track, a little recorder, some mics, I plugged it. I don't even remember how I even plugged it in, but we did this interview in the lobby. And by the time we finished that interview, there was probably a good 30, 40 people watching us. But I interviewed him, and it was funny because when you do a live broadcast like that, you could see where Chris could see where the IPs were hitting, were pinging. And he was texting me while I'm doing the show, because what I would do is I would record the interview and then I'd come back in and splice it into the show. I would just add it into my live show. And Chris would look at it and he would go, "Dude, you've got like 300 people listening to you right now on the East Coast in Pennsylvania." So I started, this is fun. And then we got a band from New York, same thing. I'm not going to say who the drummer is related to, but let's just say he's a relative, a very influential mafia boss. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't want the horse heads in my bed. But they were badass. And when we did that show, I had almost 600 people listening to my show from New York. And Chris was freaking out. This can't be right. This can't be. He started looking at it, and they were all different IP addresses that they were coming from. And so he'd go, "Dude, this is going to work." And I said, "I told you, but I would play." I had a band from Tokyo. One of Lord Tracy's biggest fans. She was from Tokyo, and she sent me some music. Of course, I couldn't understand the words, but it was heavy metal. It was cool. And but I had bands. I had a band from Australia. I had one of my main fans. I broadcast at 8 o'clock Central Time. She was listening to my show at 11 o'clock the next day. So I was like, "Dude, I'm broadcasting into the future." And I was. It was actually kind of funny because I would broadcast on Wednesday, but she was listening to it on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Live. And so she was a big Messer fan. And so I'd always play Messer. But I concentrated on local bands from coast to coast that were not signed, or even if they were signed, they were still, a local band, small band that needed some airplay. And my show went on for 5 years, and it was pretty cool. And but then when I started doing my podcast, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was like, "Man, can I treat this like my show? I don't know, So what I've done, and you said you listened to my show the other night. One of the guys I got to the point where it's like meeting the guy you work for.
Uh-huh.
That show is going to be completely all about him, all about his music, nothing else. And if I have the music, I'll play some of his music, little interview with him, whatever. But that's where I've come from. I was like, you know what? I'm going to concentrate, instead of jumping around from band to band to band to band to band, trying to play these bands on this podcast. I'll interview the artist and make that whole about the artist,
And is it an hour show?
It just depends. I've done, like I did, I recently just did Mick James, who does all the work for Chris Angel.
Uh-huh.
And I've got to polish up his interview a little bit. But I just, it's just so much fun. I mean, I just get to do a whole lot of different things, and, everybody's been so cool. I'll do the interview. I did his was like an hour and a half, and I've done shows where it's only 45 minutes.
Yeah. So is it less preparation or more preparation when you're just focusing on one artist for each show rather than trying to get a whole slew of bands for a show?
Well, it's funny because when I used to do my live show, I would write down bands because I didn't want to play the same band too many times in a row. So I would play local bands from Dallas a lot, and then I'd play some other bands from other states and stuff. But it just, I would have to look at the previous notes of what I did. Whereas now All I'm more concerned was like your artist. I would have to go to maybe Wikipedia, pull out some things that ask them about this, or ask them about that, ask them about this. What did you do? What, and I jot down notes. It's, to me, I think it's easier because I'm focusing on one artist, but I'm doing actually more work researching that artist. But it's only one artist that I have to research.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we just talk about whatever. And a lot of artists, I ask them, what do you do on your day off? What do you do? Do you, besides music, what do you enjoy doing? And they go, wow, these are different questions. I'm like, yeah, I want to ask you about your music, but what is your personal life like?
Yeah.
But that's where I come from. It's just like, I want to do bands that are still unknowns, help them out. And, maybe I can, maybe I who knows? I don't know. But
Yeah.
I enjoy what I do. I really get it, that's, but it's so much fun. And that's when you start doing it, it's like, man, I've been wanting to do something like that, but I don't know how to do it. And your equipment, I went out and I started looking at the equipment. I started looking at this and mics. The mics I got now are so sensitive. And I think that's what we dealt with when you interviewed me the first time, because we were picking up everything.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really know how to use what I had.
Right.
But I remember it was picking up everything, but I was completely ignorant to what I was doing. Now I'm just semi-ignorant to what I'm doing.
Well, I'm ignorant, so. But
before we go any further, man, a couple of seasoned pros like us, we haven't even said the name of your podcast.
I'm sorry. My podcast is the 415. If you look it up on Spotify or Google Podcast or whatever, it's going to be 4 and the 1 spelled out. 40NE 5, and it's podcast. You have to have podcast on the end, or you won't find it. But you'll see it. It says 415, and some people ask me, and I know you're going to ask me, what does 415 mean?
Yeah, what does 415? Does it mean anything?
It actually does. As you know, and maybe some of your listeners don't know, but I'm a former police officer. Hired about 8 years ago. But I was after I left 81X Rocks, I formed my own internet radio station, and I couldn't think of a name. And I was watching, it's funny because I was watching Adam 12, and the dispatcher says, we have a 415 loud music. So I looked it up, and sure enough, 415 in police jargon is loud music disturbance. Hence 415. So it stuck. So it used to be called Extreme 415 because my company was called Extreme South, but I knocked off the Extreme and said 415.
Yeah.
But that's the meaning of 415. It's loud music disturbance.
And for those young ones, Adam 12 was quite possibly one of the most popular TV shows in the 70s.
Police show.
Yeah. One Adam 12, one Adam 12.
Yeah. See the man in the corner? See the man on the corner, walk and don't walk, but yeah, it just, I wanted something that kind of meant something, and like yours, I love your name of your show, which is cool.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, you pushed me to do the podcast, and, I've always looked up to you in many different ways
thank you, man.
Great guitar player, man. I mean, you are a good guitar player, some people don't know that. But you are a good guitar player, great friend. I was even there when you opened up your guitar shop.
You were. You made that trek 60 miles down from Dallas.
Took some pictures. Stage left.
Stage left.
And I still got those pictures. Did I ever send you those? Matter of fact?
Yeah, I think you did send me a few.
Okay. Yeah, we were youngsters then.
Yeah, right. That was so long ago. Well, man, likewise, like I said, I never really understood. I never really understood, that phone call that morning that was going to lead to this lifelong friendship.
Right, exactly. Forever.
Like I said, over 20 years. I remember I booked your band, and then you guys came in a few weeks later, and you showed up with your band, and I remember this clearly, Russ. I remember it clearly. I was not having the best day personally. And I said, you're like, hey, how you doing? I was like, I could be better. And I told you what happened. And you put your arm around me and you said, brother, I'm here now. And I knew, I was like, dude, me and this guy are going to be friends. And we're still
Yeah.
friends. You know, what is
Yes.
it, 2023? And we're still
Yes.
friends. We still keep in touch. I hear from you more than I hear from a lot of people. And, thank you. Thank you for supporting everything I've ever done, including this podcast, because I know you
Thank
do
you.
support
That's
it.
good, man. Dude.
And just thanks for being a friend, brother.
Thank you, man. Likewise, now that we got all that mushy stuff out of the way, we're macho dudes.
But man, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, telling us a little bit about your story. We could probably go on for hours with everything you've done, but I appreciate you taking this time out, man. I know we were supposed to do this in person and something came up, but but thank you for being very flexible with me. You know, it's called Is Breakfast Included?
Absolutely.
And if we were having breakfast, which I probably would have taken you to the Waffle House the other day, what would you have if we were having breakfast?
Dude, that'd have been awesome. Probably a fried egg with some hash browns and toast and a couple pancakes and a nice cup of coffee.
Right on.
Yeah, something basic, dude. I can't forget about the bacon. Crispy almost
bacon.
Burnt bacon. Crispy, almost burnt.
Well, right on, brother.
Brother, thank you so much.
It's called the 415 Podcast. The one is spelled out. You find it on Spotify and Google Play, you said?
Google
Podcast.
Google Podcast, Anchor, which is now part of Spotify. So yeah, thank you. And is breakfast included? Y'all don't forget. Y'all need to, if you haven't heard all the interviews that Bernie's done, go back and listen to them all. And we're going to test at the end of the year.
Extra credit if you tell me who did the podcast twice. The only guest who did it twice.
Yeah. Hint, listen to this podcast from the beginning and he will tell you.
Well, brother, I appreciate your time, man. It was good talking to you.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks. Everybody, that was Russ Rojas, or as his friends call him, Rockwood. Make sure you check out his podcast, 415 Podcasts, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, all that good stuff. Check it out. Let me know what you think. While you're online, go to isbreakfast.bigcartel.com. Buy a shirt. Let us know how it fits. Send us a picture, Email Lisa or send it to her on Facebook or Instagram. She runs all that shit. Send it to her. Let us know how the shirt looks on you. Tell her what it feels like. Is it good quality? Is it bad quality? Let us know how we're doing. Go to Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to our podcast. Leave a review. A good one. Give us a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating. But don't give us a 1-star rating because I'm going to hunt you down if you do that. Anyway. All right, guys. I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.